My name is Dave Hollenbach, the host of From Embers to Excellence, a podcast that explores the many facets of leadership from the perspectives of some amazing people. We discuss the triumphs and failures that have shaped our lives and our leadership philosophies. I've found that it isn't whether we fail that defines us, but when we do fail, how we respond. Leaders dust off the ashes and use their failures as fuel to work harder and as lessons to come back wiser and stronger, more resilient, more determined, and more committed to excellence. Today I'm speaking with Chief Freddie Fernandez. Chief Freddie spent 32 years with Miami Fire Rescue. He's held every civil service rank, spending his last 5 years as the Deputy Fire Chief. Chief Freddie's extensive teaching experience includes training firefighters, police officers, and corrections officers. Since 1999, Chief Freddie has specialized in test preparation courses for entry and promotional level public safety candidates. He's facilitated, prepared, and assessed hundreds of examinations, conducting seminars and private training sessions for all ranks. Now, you are very well known in the fire service arena, especially in the state of Florida. I became aware of you when I was trying to promote to assistant chief. And we talked a little bit and ultimately didn't actually get to use your resources because I was eliminated from the process early on for not completing the application correctly. So I went through the process one time, and then it was the second time that your name had come up and said, this is the guy you need to talk to. He will get you prepped and ready for every phase of this process. And then, like a knucklehead, I didn't fill out all of my work history. I attached my resume instead and thought that that would be good enough because it was an internal process. I mean, they have all of my work history, but I was wrong.
That happens.
Yeah. So, Chief, thank you so much for coming on and having this conversation with me. And, I always love getting to know the history of the industry's, best mentors and just people that have really shown a passion for elevating other people in their careers. And I just thank you for coming on, and thank you for everything that you have done and continue to do for the fire service.
Well, I'll tell you, thank you for having me. It's obviously an honor and a privilege to be here and share that with you. But I think the biggest thing that you said in that introduction was just a passion about helping others. I think that when it comes to training, developing candidates, developing future officers, future firefighters, there's book knowledge and, a lot of people can share that, but how do you share passion? How do you share the love for the profession? And that's, one of the things that I really try to do because I got that from a lot of people when I was young in the profession as well.
Well, let's go back to where it all began. I'm not sure, but I have this gut feeling that you're a native Miami boy. Is that accurate?
Well, I was actually born and raised in Miami, lived in Miami all 59 of my years that I've been alive. Thank you to the grace of God that I've been alive this long and I'm still healthy. So I grew up in the city of Miami. And, growing up there, you grew up in a melting pot, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different communities. I went to highly integrated schools, and I was able to learn to get along with everyone, no matter what your background, no matter what your ethnicity, what your primary language was. And that was one of the greatest things I enjoyed about growing up in the city of Miami. Now, on top of that, I was able to get hired in the city of Miami. And for the first probably 16 years of the fire department, I worked in the neighborhoods that I grew up in. And some of the fire stations that I worked at, Station 6 on Northwest 36th Street, Station 12 on 46th Street, they were actually next to parks. And those were parks that as a kid, the city had a very robust parks program. And I spent my time growing up in those parks. The station on 46th Street that I worked at as a lieutenant was right next door to the junior high that I attended, Alapata Middle School. So, I mean, that was one of the greatest things, being able to work in that community. And then in the 1990s and early 2000s, when I was a battalion chief, I worked on Beacon Boulevard near Flagler, for those, any of that are familiar with Miami. But it was in the shadows of Miami High School, which was the high school I attended. So that was just absolutely awesome to be able to work in the neighborhood you grew up in, go to neighborhoods that you rode your bike around, things like that. So yeah, growing up and living in Miami and then working in Miami for 32 years was absolutely something I'm really proud of, and really made my career even that much more enjoyable.
Now, what led you into the fire service? Did you have family that were firefighters?
It's an interesting question. I'm glad you posed it to me, because I didn't follow the traditional path to get into the fire service. My parents, being immigrants coming from Cuba, they just wanted me to get an education. That was their big thing. Get an education, get an education. My dad would often say, hey, I just want you to have a job where you wear a shirt and tie, because they were blue collar workers. But early on, I had a passion for helping and trying to make things better. And I vividly remember a couple of occasions as a kid where fire trucks came into my neighborhood and were working at incidents. And I saw how they were working, and I said, man, that's got to be a pretty neat profession to be in. And then gradually, as time started going on, I started learning a little bit more about the profession. But at the time, I didn't have mentors. I didn't have somebody that could tell me about the fire service and really what it worked. For example, I did not know that firefighters were EMTs and paramedics. I just thought that firefighters went to fires. So a couple of these incidents that I told you about when I was maybe 12, 13, 14 years old, I saw the firemen riding the tailboard. So for the young guys that are listening to you, they may not know that we rode the tailboard. But I said, hey, that's pretty neat. You get to ride on an engine and, stand up on the back. And I said, well, you can either be a garbage man or a firefighter. And I says, well, the garbage smell is pretty bad, so let me see if I can become a firefighter. And gradually, as I got to high school, and as soon as I got out of high school, I said, this is the path that I want to follow. But at the same time, I was still going to school, trying to get that degree to keep my parents happy that that's what they wanted me to do, until I was 19. And that's when it all started coming together. And I was able to get the job offer in City of Miami. My only interview, my only process that I ever went through, when I was hired in March of 1983. And it was just a brilliant 32 years after that.
Can you talk a little bit about how you progressed through the ranks, who your mentors were, and really how they impacted your career? How did your professional life develop over the years?
Well, I was always very driven. I wanted to continue to move up the ranks. I liked the challenges, but early on in my career, I had 2 or 3 extremely positive mentors. One of them was Lieutenant Robert Pauk, Bob Pauk. Now, when I was a young firefighter in the 1980s, 83, 84, 85, he was my lieutenant. He had been on the fire department since 1950, 50. When he got hired, there were only 2 shifts. He told me the stories. If you woke up at home, you went to the station. You woke up at the station, you went home. He had been the union president, a civil service president. He had held a lot of positions. Mind you, at this point, he's been on the job for 34, 35 years. We're writing an extremely busy medic unit, and he treated every patient like if it was his mother, like if it was a family member. And I learned that patience and how to treat the patients like if they were your own family members. I had another mentor, Lieutenant Jim Fisher. He was my lieutenant during my probationary period. And again, he was always very passionate about learning and teaching and being good at your craft. And eventually, he became the chief of training, and he mentored me my entire career. He now lives out in Arizona, but he was just an incredible mentor for me. And then I'd be remiss if I don't mention one other mentor in my early career and one in my late career. Early in my career, Juan Mestis was my lieutenant. Juan was also an EMT instructor. Eventually, he became a captain, a chief, an assistant chief, And currently, Juan is actually working after retiring from Miami in Miami Beach. He's the second in command, I believe, in the city of Miami Beach right now. But Juan was also that guy that was always cool, calm under pressure, knew his material, was an excellent instructor. And I says, man, I want to be like that guy in terms of my professionalism, in terms of the way I carry myself. So those three were probably the ones that were most influential for me as a firefighter, as a lieutenant, and a company officer. But as I continued progressing, and I eventually made it to the rank of deputy fire chief, the fire chief, Maurice Kemp, was an incredible mentor, an incredible guide. I worked under Chief Kemp for 5 years during an extremely tough period from 2009 to 2015, where the budget had taken a hit, the economy had tanked, the real estate market had crashed. We had a contract imposed by the city of Miami on us. We had to put 3 units out of service. It was just a very, very difficult time. But Chief Kemp knew how to lead. He never lost sight of the goal, and he never lost sight that we're here to provide service, whether we have 700 firefighters or 650 firefighters, 15 stations or 13 stations. No matter what's going on internally, made sure this didn't push out into customer service delivery. But the one biggest thing I learned from him is he was always trying to mentor, coach, guide, and he would listen to myself, the other deputy chief, Chief Reginald Duran. Chief Reginald Duran now became the chief of Riviera Beach Fire Department, then became the chief of Palm Beach County Fire Department, and is currently an assistant county manager in Palm Beach. So Reggie and I worked directly together under Chief Kemp, and Chief Kemp would include us in all the decisions. He would get our input and genuinely listen to our input. And the one thing he would always, and if he hears this, he's going to laugh, because he would always tell me, Freddie, you need to be a chief. Freddie, I need you to be a fire chief. I want you to be a fire chief. And he'd push me constantly. And I'd push back and I'd say, we call him Mo, obviously Chief Maurice Kemp, but I say, Mo, I'm flattered, I'm honored you think I could be an effective chief, but my passion is training, my passion is teaching. And that's what I want to do when I retire. And he knows that. But even after I retired and he retired, he'd still call me periodically and go, hey, there's a position open here, there's a position open there. And I think after 2 or 3 of those, he realized I was serious, that, this is what I was going to do. But, having mentors and having the right people that have gone the path before you, one of our favorite leadership coaches, John Maxwell, says, leaders have to have followers. And I was always a good follower to these people because they were leaders. I wanted to follow them. They never did anything to me because they outranked me, because at one point they all outranked me. But they got me to go along with them because they set the example, they role modeled the behavior. And that's something I try to do as well. I'm sure, we all try to do in terms of our leadership positions.
Throughout your career, what are some of the most valuable lessons that you've learned, both professionally and personally? Just because throughout my career, I learned a lot of lessons that not only shaped my professional life, but my personal life as well. And I'm just wondering if you could share some of your experiences with us.
Well, I'm going to tackle that one from the personal side first. And one of the things that I had to learn early on, being a type A personality, maybe even a type A plus personality, and always an overachiever, trying to really do a lot, is to balance and to try to find that work-life balance. I have to be careful not to volunteer for every single committee out there, not to volunteer for every project, not to volunteer for all the jobs that are out there, because that was my personality, my drive. So you try to find that balance where you are committed both personally and professionally, because if not, as you know, in the fire service, there's a lot of marriages that end in divorce. And I think a big part of it is you're gone for 24 hours. In California, a lot of those departments work 48 hours. You're gone from home for long periods of time. You're not sleeping, you're not eating. So you're cranky, you're hungry, and things like that when you get home. So to try to find that balance, to me, was extremely important. And I'm very fortunate. In August, it'll be 35 years that I've been married. I've only been married once, and a lot of people in the fire service can't say that. So trying to find that balance, find your right mate to help you and understand, those days when you're grumpy or tired. And then professionally, I think the one thing that really helped me was setting goals. And goals have to be in writing and goals have to be measurable. If you put a goal and you just throw it out there one day, how do you hold yourself accountable to it? So I did set up an action plan. And coming out of the fire academy, I set a goal to be a paramedic within 2 years. I set a goal to be a driver engineer within a year after that. And then my goals were to get promoted at 5, 10, and 15 years to lieutenant, captain, and battalion chief, respectively. Now, unfortunately, I didn't meet the third goal. I got promoted to lieutenant, got promoted to captain. Now, the reason I didn't meet the third goal is I took the battalion chief's test as soon as I was eligible, had great mentors. As a matter of fact, one of them that I mentioned, Juan Messes, was one of my coaches that helped me prepare for the battalion chief's test. And I scored #1 on that test. And you're probably wondering, well, wait a minute. Well, you scored #1. What happened? Well, there were no openings. We had a budget crisis in that era in the late 90s, and there was a drop program that eventually had been implemented. And long story short, the 2-year period the list ran, nobody retired. There were no openings. So that actually sounds like a bad thing or something that would upset you. It didn't upset me because we kind of knew it going in, how you forecast retirement and things. So it wasn't a major surprise. But I prepped for that first exam like it was the real deal, assuming maybe there'd be one opening, most two. There wound up being none. But that set the stage for the next exam. And now when the next exam hit, I was able to score #1 again, studying again with my partners and my teammates. But on that list, there was a lot of openings. There was, I think, if I remember correctly, 10 to 12 openings. Now, there's only 14 battalion chiefs total in the city of Miami. So you can imagine by the end of that list, you were at the top of the seniority, top of the pecking order. So coincidentally, after doing well on these exams, a lot of my colleagues says, hey, you teach at the college, don't you? You've got a lot of experience as an instructor. You've been a recruit instructor. You taught at the medical campus, the fire academy, the police academy. You love teaching. Why don't you train people how to get promoted? But being the typical, fireman, tunnel vision type of thing, I said, no, man, I'm super busy. I work at 3 campuses. I like what I do now. But more and more of my colleagues started saying, hey, you got to think about this. You would be great at this. And you've proven track record that you can do it. So as fate would have it, and I always think there's a higher power that's governing us and watching us, but I was offered a job working with a company doing assessment center testing around the country. So now I've been a candidate. I've learned how the process works because I've worked with a company putting on testing. We put on a lot of testing in Florida and Georgia primarily back in that time. So that's what kind of sprung this career. That's what got me into this and doing the training. It was just a series of hurdles and obstacles, but it actually turned into be a blessing in disguise.
I want to dig into leadership, especially leadership in high stress environments. You've been there, you've done that. There is a difference in leadership when you go from company officer to being in charge of a battalion, and then even more so when you elevate above the rank of battalion chief. I was wondering if you could maybe walk us through some valuable lessons that you learned about leadership through your time moving through those ranks, things that were expected of you from the people that you were following, and things that were expected of you from the people that you led.
Well, that's a great way to put it. You're right. As you move up, the situations just become more and more stressful, more and more volatile. Now, 2 things that came to my mind as you asked that question. One was, again, an older chief that when I was a young firefighter, a young lieutenant, I actually was in his battalion. He's since passed away. His name is Ray Mears. I would never in a million years use his first name if he were still alive and if he were still on the department. His first name to me was always Chief. But it wasn't because he told you he was the chief. It wasn't because he reminded you, I'm the chief and you're not. Never. I never heard him say that. I never heard him order somebody to call him, by a certain title. But it was just the way he carried himself. and he was always very even keel. No matter how bad things were, no matter how good things were, he was always very even keel. So I remember being at small incidents or large incidents, and no matter what it was, whether he was saying cancel all incoming units with the pot on the stove, or give me a second alarm, give me a third alarm, you never heard his voice change. His inflection was always the same. So when I was a young chief and I got excited and I started getting amped up, I'd always take a couple of deep breaths and say, how would Chief Mears make this radio transmission? And I thought about that before I keyed the mic. So I made sure that I did that. Another very important thing is to always remember to model the behavior. One of our favorite leadership coaches, and you and I have talked a lot about leadership, but one of them is General Colin Powell. And one of the things that Powell said is that the essence of all leadership is trust. And you have to build that trust, earn that trust on a daily basis. But you can lose it in 1 second. And you can never lose that trust. So you have to be honest. You have to be truthful. You have to keep your word. Now, one of the great speeches of General Colin Powell was that he learned as a young infantryman. And one of the stories he tells is that one of the persons that taught him leadership was, you got to get to the point where your members will follow you, if only out of curiosity. And you have to, if you're hungry, you can't let your members know you're hungry. If you're cold, you can't let them know you're cold. So you have to always show the behavior you want them to follow. It isn't that you don't demonstrate a weakness, because hiding weaknesses from your followers is a recipe for disaster. They know your weaknesses already. But if you're angry, you're cold, you're hungry, you keep forging ahead until that mission gets done. So I think it's just very important that you think about these things in the heat of the moment, and you use them as guiding principles. You know, every organization has core values, mission statement, vision statement. But I think we as individuals need to have our own core values, right? So whatever it is, professionalism, integrity, competence, but you have to make sure that you're walking the walk, not talking it. So one of the things that I would do a lot as a chief is go to the stations for lunch, go to the stations for dinner. And I was always constantly getting invited to come to the stations, making yourself accessible. So you don't want to be the chief to just, hey, you know, he's in his office somewhere. You need to be accessible. Sometimes I had to balance that a little bit, because you don't want to be overly accessible in this context. Sometimes people will come up to me and say, hey, Chief, do you have a minute? And just a warning, fair warning to everybody, when somebody says, do you have a minute, set aside like 15, all right? But I'd say, yeah, come on in. And a lot of times they wanted to get something off their chest. And if it was professional, hey, my captain is doing such and such a thing, or I'm upset about this at the station, or I'm upset about that, I'd always listen attentively. I'd try to restate what they told me to make sure I understood it. But then I'd always make sure that they weren't skipping levels in the chain of command. So if they were coming to me with an issue that should be a captain's level issue, a lieutenant's level issue, a district chief level issue, they time out. I'm listening to your issue. I'm going to address it. I'll look into it. But if you skip the level in the chain of command, we can't do that. So remember, we have to always follow chain of command, but that goes in both directions. Unity of command. They can only report to one leader. So, you know, that concept about going out to the stations, if you've ever, you know, researched, or one of the leaders that I researched was Sam Walton from Walmart. And one of the things he had was management by walking around. And early on in his career, when he only had a few stores, a few hundred even, he tried to make it to every store at least once a year. And he wore a name tag. His name tag didn't say Mr. Walton, it said Sam. And he was, you know, he tried to make himself accessible. He would listen. Eventually, you know, Walmart grew so much that he couldn't make it to every store every year, but that's what he did. So that theory of management by walking around, I think, is very important. But I want to make sure I don't use the word management interchangeably with leadership. All right. I think they both are important. You have to be a leader and a manager. But management and leadership are not synonymous. They're not interchangeable. They're two different aspects. And just because you have a title, lieutenant, captain, chief, battalion chief, deputy chief, fire chief, it doesn't matter. That makes you a manager, but it does not make you a leader. The only one thing that makes you a leader is little ducklings following behind you. If there's nobody walking behind you, you're just out for a walk. And only your subordinates can determine if you're a leader. You don't determine if you're a leader. Only your subordinates do.
One of the things that you said at the very beginning of that, talking about keying up the mic, and I think that so many of us in the fire service and law enforcement, just public safety in general, and probably even in um, combat units, when they're directing fire or something, when you're operating in that incident command position where you're giving direction, your tone of voice and how you deliver the message, clear and concise, really is an indicator of how in control you are of the situation, your emotions, and just that has such an effect on how people operate on that scene. I know from my experience, coming into a big incident, listening to somebody on the radio that was speaking very frantically and maybe overdoing it with the amount of details, it's it really elevates that excitement level and can set the tone of the call to be one that is a little more hectic than it needs to be. So having that calm demeanor and that consistent tone, I think conveys that command presence and can really lessen that excitement level for the people coming into the scene, and even the people already operating can have that sense of safety, like, this is, he's got this under control.
Well, one of the things that I think is very important to understand is that in communication, the actual words, the words themselves only account for 7% of communication. The other 93% has to do with your body language, your posture, your excitement level, your diction, your tone, your gestures. Now, when you're communicating by radio, they can't see you. All they can do is hear you. So now that part of the pun becomes amplified even more because they're just hearing you. They're not seeing if you're calm. They're determining if you're calm, if you're under control, only on what they hear. So one of the things that I think is very important too in that context is to not key the radio until you're ready. Don't key the radio, have an open mic, because now you're tying up the air on top of that. Another good thing is to have good radio etiquette. In other words, I try to avoid Q signals, 10 signals, and those type of things. Just try to talk in plain talk like we're recommended. And also to repeat messages back. So if somebody says, hey, Chief, I've got an all clear on the first floor, I don't say copy or acknowledge or Roger 10-4. I say, we have a clear on the first floor. And that way everybody understands what the message was. So we cannot assume, what happens when you assume, right? I won't say it here, but everybody knows what it means. But you can't assume that the message has been received. The only way to confirm the message has been received is to repeat it back. So I tried to get my company office to do that. So if I said, hey, give me a primary search on the second floor, Division 2, I expected to hear copy, Chief, primary search, Division 2. So that way we're all on the same page. And I tried to do the same thing with dispatch. One other thing that I did a lot on scenes, and some people may or may not agree with this, but as much as possible, especially the first, let's say 5 or 10 minutes on a scene, I tried to stay in my rig. Because now you eliminate that urge to run in. You eliminate that urge to stick your head where it doesn't belong, to get in the way of the crews. And you have to trust your crews. You have to understand their capabilities, their strengths, their weaknesses. So I think that was a big thing as a chief officer to talk about that stress and trying to stay calm, is knowing your officers and controlling your environment. So here in Miami, South Florida, where I work, listen, in the summertime, if you go outside in the afternoon, there's a huge likelihood it's going to rain. and there's a huge likelihood you're going to sweat like crazy because of the humidity. So that was another factor to stay in the car, less interruptions. If people came up to the car to talk to me, it was up to me whether to let them talk or not. I had the power locks, I had the power windows. So if I have somebody coming up that I think has valuable information and I'm ready to listen, I'd lower the window or tell them to come sit in the car. But imagine if you're not in the car and you have companies raising you on the radio, you have people coming up and talking to you at the same time, you can only focus. And, my priority was the people inside that building. And then I controlled the communications on the outside. So I think that was a big thing, is to manage those communications. Going back to Chief Mears, how would Chief Mears say this? Going back to Chief Juan Mestis, one of my early mentors when he was a lieutenant, I was a firefighter. He would, on scenes, if it was a defensive operation, he clearly stated, hey, everybody, this is defensive. Let's slow down. Let's take our time. We're not going to have an injury right now. We're not going to risk anything at this point in time. But if it was an offensive fire where there's a high life hazard, he would clearly say that, hey, this is an offensive fire. We're going to be aggressive. But Juan would kind of set the tone for everybody on the scene. So he was another one that I would focus on. Okay, what would Juan do right now? And you have to have those people, good and bad. Now, if you have others, then those names, obviously, I won't mention, but you have others that scream on the radio, key the radio without thinking what they're going to say. Again, you focus on those and you go, okay, I'm not going to do that. So those are some great questions. Appreciate it.
What you are known for, clearly in Miami, known for your service to the citizens and visitors of Miami. But outside of that, what I believe you're known for, what I know you for, is your ability to take somebody that has that drive and determination to get promoted, to reach the next level, and polish them in such a way that it becomes easy for them to get promoted. And I was wondering how you came about with this. It seems like a magic formula, like.
So that's a great question, and it's one that's relatively easy for me to answer, believe it or not. So in the late 90s, when I was challenging my test to get promoted, there were, how you have negative people on the department, you have your Debbie Downers, the people always find something negative with everything. And there were people saying, oh, all you have to do is act on the assessment center. All you have to do is read off a script on the assessment center. And, I would hear those comments and I'd say, well, that doesn't seem to make sense to me. And the more that I learned, I realized something, and I told this to every one of my students, even before they sign up for the program. I tell them this: we are going to learn how to be a great fire officer, a great sergeant, lieutenant, police officer, police commander, whatever the rank is. We're going to learn how to be a good leader, a good tactician, a good manager. We're going to learn career-long skill sets. And when I'm telling them this, they're looking at me going, hey, wait a minute, what the heck are you talking about? I called you to try to get promoted. And I go, yes, we are going to get promoted. We're going to score at the highest possible place on the list. Number one, especially, is what I'm after. But we have to think in that order. We're not doing something for the test. We're doing something for the career. So we're learning how to run an ICS scene. We're learning how to follow NIMS, incident priorities, strategic goals, learning how to do span of control, groups and divisions, all that stuff on fire scene. We're learning how to do a counseling session to listen to your subordinates' issues, make them aware of your expectations, make them able to carry out your expectations, having them trust in you that if they have an underlying issue, they'll come to you. But at the same time, warning them in a polite way that if they don't comply with company expectations, organizational expectations, there will be repercussions. But you never threaten discipline. It's just out there. They know that if they don't do it, they're not meeting your expectations. And I'm also big on making sure that we are anticipating everything that's coming up on the test. So we don't walk into a test blind. We've done our homework, just like you pre-planned buildings. We all have gone out there and pre-planned buildings, and you put where the panel is, where the access points are, where the stairs are, the elevators, all the stuff we do for our pre-planning. But why would you enter a promotion exam assessment center without pre-planning? Why would anybody take a physical ability test? Please tell me that nobody goes to a physical ability test without at least working out once, right? Or at least walking through the steps. So I'm big on that, trying to pull things that we do in the fire service all the time, our 360s, our pre-planning, working out, drilling. So I try to give that same approach to the assessment center, where we're not prepping for an assessment center, we're prepping for the position. And then secondary to that, I show you how to demonstrate it with a clock running, because I think that's the biggest challenge in assessment center. It's the clock. The clock eats people alive.
I'm sure in your time you have faced this. I had dealt with this as a lieutenant, as a chief officer, where individuals would come to me seeking coaching or mentoring in order to help them promote. And a lot of times, well, not a lot of times, there was on occasion individuals that would say, oh, I'm going for this position, with the wrong mindset. They were looking to, they weren't very good in the position they were in, so they thought it would be easier in the next position. So that's what they wanted to do, is promote to leave this behind. Well, automatically, that's a big red flag right there. How do you, or how did you handle that? And maybe like trying to get them to spend a little more time with their professional development before they went for that promotion?
That's just a super question. And the moment you posed it to me, I thought of two examples that I wanted to share with you. Let's talk about the first one, because this happened very early back in 1999, 2000, when I first started doing the assessment center training. I trained a candidate from a major department here in Florida. The candidate wasn't quite ready for the role of a battalion chief, but he was very smart, very motivated, but he didn't have enough experience, didn't have enough tenure, and just wasn't well-rounded enough, in my opinion, at the time. But we worked together. Like I said, he was intelligent, he was committed, he gets promoted. Not only does he get promoted, he scores #1, but he has some issues. Let's just leave it there. He eventually gets demoted. He does not get through the probationary process of that rank. And that hit me really, really hard. And that is what drove me so much to have my mission statement. My mission statement is to develop fire officers there so that they can demonstrate their knowledge, skills, and abilities on the assessment center. It doesn't say to build assessment center knowledge, skills, and abilities. It doesn't say to build assessment center skills. It's to build good knowledge, skills, and abilities they can demonstrate on the test. So that kind of started that foundation 20 plus years ago, that I said, I can't have this happen anymore. Now, there's two departments in particular that is the second part to the answer to your question. In my department, City of Miami, the lieutenants primarily rode the EMS medic unit. We call them rescues, like a lot of departments in Florida do. Other bigger northern, more established departments may call them ambulances or medic units, but the lieutenants run their wheels off. And the only way to get off the medic unit and get on a suppression unit, the best way is to become a captain. There's a few other ways, but so I did have a lot of students that were coming to me, and I knew for a fact they had no really business, or their heart really wasn't into being a captain or what a captain meant. They just didn't want to be a lieutenant. And in Dallas, I've done a lot of training in Dallas. They have a similar makeup. And a lot of times I'll ask the students, hey, what's your goal of getting promoted? And they immediately say, get off the box, get off the box. And I have to redirect that thought. I remember also with when I got promoted to battalion chief, within a couple of weeks, I had a captain come up to me. And this is when I had just started the training business. And he comes up to me and goes, hey, I'm glad you're here. I want to talk to you about preparing. And I go, the next test is 2 years out, right? He goes, yeah. And I says, good, we start preparing today. And he looks at me like if I'm a unicorn. And he goes, what do you mean we start preparing today? And I said, yeah, we start preparing today. We start doing drills. We start doing meetings. We start pre-planning build. We start doing everything that you're going to do on the test. We start doing it now. As a matter of fact, tomorrow you're going to come in here and you're going to sit in my seat for an hour. And he's looking at me like, man, you crazy. And I'm like, no, that is how you prepare. You have to prepare every day, not just, hey, it's 6 weeks out, let's go, it's go time. That doesn't work. It just doesn't.
For a new fire officer or a new chief officer, what's some really good advice to share with them about this new position that they're coming into?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of really good books out there on this. A lot of them, on your website, you post them there. But like, for instance, going from buddy to boss, the pride of ownership. There's another book called Step Up and Lead. All of these books, you got to immerse yourself in them. Chief Salker from New York, 20 something years ago, he wrote a book called First In, Last Out Leadership. There's another book by the chief of Champaign, Illinois, Gary Ludwig, on leadership. There's a Chief Karpluk out of Canada. He writes books on these topics. So you got to immerse yourself in this. And remember that hardware you got, that gold badge, that bugle, that collar ornament, the name tag, that don't mean squat, right? You have to carry yourself in the position and go in with humility. Humility is the key. You always give credit to your crews for the successes. You always take responsibility for the failures, and you need to learn more from your crew. So back to our, at least my favorite leadership coach, which is John Maxwell. My favorite expression from John Maxwell is so amazing, and it is so simple, right? So John Maxwell says, nobody cares how much you know until they know how much you care. So yeah, you come in, yeah, I'm number one on the test. I'm a lieutenant. I'm a captain. I got promoted. I'm this, I'm that. Who cares? Nobody cares. What they care about is providing service. They care about growing in their careers. They care about being valued. Ultimately, they need to go home at the end of the 24 hours. And hopefully at the end of their career, they milk the pension system for 25 plus years. As you know, we have a lot of cardiac issues, a lot of cancer issues in the fire service. So if you're overweight, you're not exercising, you're telling your crew members, hey, cardiac issues, blood pressure issues, they're okay. If you're not deconning your gear, if you're not wearing your SCBA at every call. So I got hired, like I said, in the early 1980s. And if you wore your SCBA at an outdoor fire, like a car fire, a dumpster fire, a trash fire, I cannot repeat what you were called on this program. All right, I cannot repeat that terminology here. It's inappropriate. But you were chastised, you were ridiculed, you were made fun of for wearing an SCBA. So that culture has to change. And as you grow as a new officer, you can't tell somebody to put on a hood and you don't have your hood on. You can't tell somebody to buckle up your seatbelt and you don't have your seatbelt on. You can't tell them it's important that we get out of the house within 60 seconds, 90 seconds, the NFPA standard, and yet you're the last one to get to the rig every time. So it's really about leading by example, hubris, humility. Nobody cares what your rank is. They show them what your rank is. So I remember too, way back in the 80s, studying for lieutenant's test. It was an incredible tactics book named by William Clark. Those of you who've been to the Ocala Fire Academy, he's got a section there memorializing him. He was an old New York chief, came to Florida. But he also would say, this is an old school chief. He was in the 50s, 60s, 70s. He said that people are looking for three things: fairness, ability, and firmness. So treat everybody fairly, demonstrate your ability or your competence, and you have to be firm. There's times you have to be firm. So when it's time to do something at the fire station, a project at the station, I was of philosophy, hey guys, how do you want to do this? But there was times like at a scene or an emergency scene, it's, hey guys, this is what we're doing. Doesn't mean you don't listen to input. You'd be a fool if the guy says, hey, there's a wire on that fence, then you don't listen. But there's times to be firm. There's time to be authoritative. But I thought that at the fire station level, this is more important, especially at the company officer level, let the members make the most of the decisions. It doesn't matter what time you eat dinner. It doesn't matter who mops the floor. It doesn't matter, what product they use to do something in the station. Let them make the decision. Incorporate them in the decision and make sure you listen. Don't give them ear candy. Hey, I'm going to listen, and then you don't. Listen. And that's one of the things I learned from Chief Kemp. You got to make sure you're listening, because if not, they won't share information with you if you don't take it seriously and incorporate their suggestions.
I actually just had a conversation, I want to say it was yesterday, with an individual where we were talking about the importance of communication. And one of the key components of effective communication is listening with intent and intention. One thing to listen to somebody, what they have to say, but if you have no intention of following through with anything that they have to say, then it's pointless.
So let me share a story with you on that topic. When I was a battalion chief, I had a captain who I thought was a very good captain. He drilled a lot, he trained a lot, he was very by the book, very passionate about the career, but he wasn't the type to listen, right? So he comes up to me one day and he goes, "Hey, Chief, I got a situation. I want to discuss it with you." Hey, come on in, let's have a chat. So he spells out what the issue is. He tells me what his ideas are. And when he's finished, I said, "Okay, let me tell you how I feel about it. When I was a captain, I dealt with exactly the same issue. I did exactly what you're proposing to do, and it didn't work. I did it. I'm not telling you from some hypothesis, some book. I did what you're proposing. It did not work. I tried it for about 6 or 8 weeks, and I had to stop it because it just wasn't working." And he goes, "Oh, okay, Chief." So he walks out, and guess what he does? He does exactly what he came in, exactly what I told him that didn't work for me. So he implements it. Guess what happens about 2 months later? Comes back and he goes, "Oh, Chief, I should have listened to you." I says, "Listen, all I can do is make suggestions. I don't run fire stations. I run the battalion. You run the fire station." And it was the type of issue that wasn't important enough for me to get involved in, right? So that's a classic example of if you're going to ask a question, you're going to ask for input, you need to listen to that input. And that's one of the things that I enjoyed so much working under the fire chief. Now, to be honest with you, I never really aspired to go to those administrative positions. I just a passionate field guy. I love the operation. I love being out in the field. But I learned a lot being in those positions. Now you attend meetings with civilians, so to speak, people from the law department, people from procurement, elected officials, and you realize how important these listening skills are. And that's how you grow. Like you said, you have to listen with intent. And I think a big problem is many people listen, but they're not focusing on what the person is saying or what that person is trying to get across. They're planning what their rebuttal is going to be, what their answer is going to be, and they're not even listening. So it's very important to make sure that you understand not only the words they're saying, but what their intent is, what they're trying to accomplish. And if you shut that door too many times, nobody's going to come up and talk to you anymore.
I'm sure there's people listening to maybe hear some steps that they could take to better prepare for a promotional exam. If you're willing to share, great. I don't want you to give up your entire process. But
that's an easy question. That's actually a soft pitch, to be honest with you. And here's
right.
why. I get asked all the time, "Hey, Chief, what do they," I'm using they in quotation marks, "what do they want to hear?" They being the raiders or the assessors. And I tell them, you know what? I take great offense to that question, because we should be looking at things a different way. It's not about what they want to hear. It's about what a great officer is expected to do, what a great leader is expected to do. So I tell my students is that, listen, this is simple. Look for the best leaders in your agency, the best tacticians in your agency, the people that are most revered and respected, and do what they do. But do it in the context of the test. Now, with that being said, we all know the scourge of the fire service is freelancing. So you can't go to an assessment center and freelance. You have to have a system. So I have a system, believe it or not, for every one of the assessment center exercises. And what I tell my students is this is my approach and my team's approach. We will show you our system. For instance, I have a 5-step problem solving model. And I go over identifying the issue, identifying and doing research and analysis, looking into your options and resources, implementing a specific and measurable action plan, and then evaluating. So I call it the IROPE: issue, research, options, plan, and evaluate. But I tell people this plan is useless. This plan is of no value. This plan will not help you. And again, I get that look like, what you talk about, Willis, you're telling me this plan and then you're telling me it's useless. What I tell them is this: it is useless if you cannot reproduce it under pressure. What does under pressure mean? You can't call a timeout. You can't get a do-over. Number 2, you have to be able to reproduce it on an unknown situation. So you can't go into an assessment center and go, hey, whoa, timeout. I didn't think about a hazmat spill. I thought we were going to run a fire. Give me another scenario. You can't do that. And number 3, the clock. You've got to be able to do it with the clock running, and you can't get flustered when that clock starts counting down. So we've all been on emergencies where we get there in 3, 4, 5 minutes, and the citizen says, you took forever to get here. And you pull the run logs, you pull all the data, we were here in 3, 4 minutes, because it's that urgency, that time is when you're stressed. So Dave, that's why I told you that question was really a soft pitch. It's because we're not trying to go up, figure out what they want to hear. We're going to determine the best ways to do things by leadership principles, management principles, mentors, coaches. We follow SOGs, we follow the union contract, and then we come up with systems. So on a tactical side, again, not to get into too much detail, but I have a 12-step outline that I follow for tactical scenarios. And it covers everything from when the bell rings to we go back and pick up at the station and take a shower within the hour to get rid of that cancer crap from our body. But what I tell students is this system isn't going to work for you if you can't apply it to an extrication, to an MCI, to an active shooter, to a structure fire, to a commercial fire, to any incident. So for example, I just had some students recently in a big department up here in South Florida that we were preparing for a test, and their vendor gave them a car in a canal with entrapment, with people underwater. So that's an example of, I don't care what the scenario is, I'm just going to prop it into my system so I'm not freelancing. And that's, I think, the biggest thing is we just don't freelance, we come up with a system. But I always tell my students, take my material and create your material.
Awesome. And for those listening that want to connect with you, what's the best way for them to connect with you in order to, enroll in your program, learn more about you?
Well, one of the things that myself and my business partner in the assessment company is Chief David Johns. We always pride ourselves in answering our phone, right? So the only time I don't answer the phone is if I'm in the middle of a coaching session, I'm in the middle of a podcast like this, then I won't answer the phone. But they can call me at any time, call David at any time. We return calls as soon as possible. But the best way really is to go to my website, which is fireassessmentcenterprep.com. Now on that website, everything will be fire-based, everything will be red and our colors that we like. Because yes, for my Dade County people, fire truck's supposed to be red. And then I have another website. I have a website called Police Assessment Center Prep. And all my law enforcement brothers and sisters, that's the website for them. Everything there is blue. Obviously, blue is the color that symbolizes the law enforcement. So Fire Assessment Center Prep or Police Assessment Center Prep, there we have a lot of information. Our phone numbers are there. Like I said, we pride ourselves. People sometimes I'll answer the phone, hey, this is Chief Freddie. And there's like silence. And I'm like, hello, the Chief Freddie. They go, oh, I wasn't expecting to hear you. And I go, okay, well, cool. I wasn't expecting to get your call either. But then we chat for a while. And I want all of my students, before you enroll in the program, give us a call. Let's talk about it first. Just explain, make sure we're a good fit. My partner, David, likes to say this. If you're not willing to put the effort in for number one, I really don't want to work with you because it's about me. I want to be number one. I want you to be number one. So I have that frank discussion with them on the front end. Have you spoken to your wife, your husband, your boyfriend, your girlfriend, your significant other? This takes a village. Getting promoted isn't easy. There's a lot of competitive, a lot of brilliant people out there. And if you don't get the village involved, it's going to be a big struggle. So anybody that's listening, feel free to reach out whenever possible. I'll reach back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I look forward to having the conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Chief. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me and share your insights and your information with the listeners. And I really thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. I thank you, Dave, for the opportunity. And if I could just put my 2 cents in there, the things that you do, your book, which is in my possession, and I'm working my way through your book on leadership. I think it's very important, especially that people that have been there, done that. We share our experiences. In your case, you share a lot of your experiences in your career, but not from a hypothetical, theoretical perspective. But I've been there. These are the things that I've done. These are the things that I've found that are successful. These are the things that work. And like you said, to try to fireproof your leadership. So I think that's very important too. So I commend you for what you're doing. And I thank you for giving me a chance to share some of what I'm doing with you.
One of the things that I think is key to effective, solid leadership that you can be proud of is that intention, that drive to add value to others. And having you on, I knew would add value to me, but I also knew that sharing you with the audience would bring value to them. So, I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing so much with us.
Good. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to this episode of From Embers to Excellence. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Follow me on your favorite podcast platform and visit hollenbachleadership.com for additional content. My goal is and always will be to add value to as many people as possible. So if I can be of any assistance to you or someone you know, please connect with me via email or on one of my social media accounts, linked on the homepage of my website. Remember, our failures don't define us unless we let them, and the only true measure of a leader is the success of their team.